Welcome back, everyone, to the Men on a Mission podcast. I'm your host, Brad Richard, and shortly we will be starting our next episode. We will be providing you tools, resources, and information that you can use to make your life just a little bit better. But before we do that, let's honor our country, and then we'll begin the podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to the Men on a Mission podcast. I'm your host, Brad Richard, and today is May 31st. This is the month of May centered podcast. We're going to be having a conversation about PTSD during the month of May, and it is Mental Health Awareness Month. And even though we are recording this on the 31st of May, it will air in June. Today, I have two guests on with me. I have Dr. Siegel, Rebecca Siegel on with me, and Bryan Buckley. They're both on the podcast with me today. And I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about each of these folks. And bear with me while I try to read through their bio. And if I make a mistake, I apologize to both of them ahead of time. So with that being said, Dr. Rebecca Siegel is a clinical psychiatrist and author of the newly published book, The Brain on Cannabis: What You Should Know About Recreational and Medical Marijuana, a comprehensive and myth-busting guide on marijuana use and its effects on the brain. The book also addresses how to effectively talk to young people about recreational marijuana use based on her work as a physician who specializes in the assessment and treatment of anxiety, mood disorders, and ADHD. And I believe she is also treating PTSD as well. So that is Dr. Siegel's bio. Let me tell you a little bit about Bryan Buckley. As a special operations team commander with the Marine Raiders, Bryan led multiple teams in deployment to Operation Enduring Freedom, Trans-Sahara Africa, Southeast Asia, and Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan, Helmand Province. Developed rapport with numerous host nation forces, enhanced capability and capacity within the host nation units, and briefed U.S. ambassadors. Additionally, he led a 20-man Marine raid team to Afghanistan that mentored, trained, and conducted over 40 combat operations with an Afghanistan Special Operations Battalion. Bryan also deployed twice to Operation Iraqi Freedom with Marine Infantry and Marine Reconnaissance. So, I don't know if I botched that, but those are their bios. Tells you a little bit about both of them. And we're going to start. Dr. Siegel, I believe you're on the line with us, correct?
That I am.
Well, thank you for being on the Men on a Mission podcast. And just go ahead and tell us a little, if you can kind of fill in the blanks. That was a short bio, and your bio is much longer than that. But what brought you to the specialty, or brought you to the issue or the treatment of medical marijuana, and kind of take it from there, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So, well, first of all, thank you for having me, and also thank you for and Bryan, thank you for everything you've done. I am very humbled. So definitely, it has been an incredible journey for me. The journey still continues. I am a practicing psychiatrist, as you read. I've been doing it about 20 years, and that meant I was treating a lot of people with medication, right, pharmaceutical medication and other types of things. But cannabis wasn't really in my wheelhouse, right, as a therapeutic option until one of my favorite patients, I call her patient zero, basically asked me, she showed me, she said, I no longer need a specific type of, medication for sleep, and showed me a photo of a cannabis chocolate bar that she said had changed her life, and, had gotten it in Colorado. And this was in 2015. And so, at first, it really obviously piqued my curiosity. And, I had to learn a whole lot, right? And I had to educate myself, and because I knew that if people were coming to me, patients and clients, to ask questions about it, and if this started rolling, once she came to me, it started like an avalanche of curiosity for me, and educating myself and learning how I could exist in it in New York City, right, in New York State, where I'm from. But also then it became the larger issue of, how to increase people's awareness about cannabis. Cannabis is not a one size, fits all, therapeutic option. It's, it's been, it's an illegal substance, federally, right? And it's, it has a incredible history of, how it's been used for therapeutic purposes. But when, the U.S. government is very, not particularly behind it, and, it's very complicated. And so I wanted to know more about it, certainly for myself, for my patients, and then that, that also, in my mind, that's how the book sort of started to form. I had so many questions. I started going and doing my research and going to conferences and actually, looking at real scientific research behind things while people were coming to me with questions about how I could help them, right? So that it sort of took shape through that.
Why do you think? What's the number one reason that the federal government seems to be so anti-medical marijuana?
I think that's a very complicated question, right? And I think that it's definitely, it has a lot to do with how in the past it was certainly while I was growing up, where it was the cannabis was there was the war on drugs. It was, this is what it can do to you. The perception that it was, not really thought of as a therapeutic option. And that's where, I did the most changing. I realized, when as more and more patients came to me, and they said, like, it's changed my life. This is how it's helping me, right? And so I was much more open-minded to, to learning and understanding and seeing how it could be helpful. It was not like the federal government is it caught up in bureaucracy, the VA, all kinds of things. It's very difficult. But when you hear people, it's like in individual stories. That's how I came to it, hearing people and how it had helped them, and also how for some how it didn't help them, right? But I definitely think people need options. People definitely need help for all kinds of things. And the main, there were many reasons why people would come to me, but certainly PTSD, chronic pain, all things like that were two of the major reasons, why people were coming to me and asking me about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, as recent as in this last week, excuse me, they had the shooting in Texas. Well, they've had two shootings in Texas, and the conversation has come up, or it's been forced to for people to look at mental illness and mental health. And in my opinion, working with as many veterans that I've worked with personally, because I do mentoring and coaching, and I work with veterans specifically. Um, I think mental health in America is a much larger issue than drug abuse or the war on drugs or any other campaign that is out there. In my opinion, I think mental health is kind of it kind of leads the pack of all those other things, and I think that should be the focus of the country as a whole on mental health instead of all these different
I agree with you.
side avenues. And pretty much every news story that we hear does, I mean, if you break it down, they all lead back to some form of mental health, or a mental issue or an imbalance or whatever the case may be. And so, I know that you are using the medical marijuana with anxiety, mood
Correct.
disorders, ADHD, PTSD. Um, what do you think? What's your opinion on just the general population having access to it, um, for chronic mental illness, and a lot of people that maybe are getting treatment from a psychiatrist or a counselor, or they're in therapy. I've met so many people that have been in therapy for years, and I've had to break the news to them that if they've been in therapy, for years and years and years, it's not working.
Absolutely. I think that exactly that people need to have options, therapeutic options. That means, right, therapy, all kinds of things, right, that will help. But I think that, if people have found something that they think has helped, but they're doing it in a safe and, like it's all, I say, transparency, moderation, understanding, being aware. There are a lot of people who come to this with a lot of understanding about cannabis. Then there are many others who do not have much of a clue. And, like I definitely see my role as helping educate people, like, the safety of it, the options that are out there for people. You don't want to do things illegally. You want to be safe, right? Because anything done, in a not regulated way can be unsafe, right? And lots of people taking medication that is not, the way doctors would prescribe it can be very dangerous. So it's not just cannabis. It's not, it's anything. But I think that doctors, physicians have a real, there's such a need for mental health awareness. They absolutely, this is a huge crisis in our country. And I think that, providing people with options is so important. If you feel like you have no options, it's absolutely like you're going to do a nosedive into, feeling much, much worse. Cannabis can absolutely be an option for some, but you need to be able to understand what it might do and how to, what is safe.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think, and I'll ask Bryan the question as well, but how much do you think plays a part as far as the amount of profit or the market value compared to pharmaceuticals? The pharmaceutical business compared to the cannabis business?
Well, I mean, I'm not so sure how to comment on that, because I think that it's a complicated issue for sure. I definitely do not rush to, slam people with medication, pharmaceutical medication. But A lot of people want a more natural approach, right? But also, like, so the issue for physicians, and as the way I see it, is that pharmaceuticals have gone through FDA testing, right? Whereas cannabis, because it's federally illegal, cannot be tested in that way. And so physicians are not getting educated about it. They're not aware. They may be very afraid, to think of it as an option, as a type of therapeutic option. So that's where my thought is that cannabis in some way needs to be federally legalized so that physicians can get behind it.
Right. I guess.
So that you need to be able to do the controlled research studies, the evidence-based medicine that physicians want in order to feel safe about actually making this recommendation for their patients.
Mm-hmm. I guess where I was going with that question, and I know it's a loaded question, so sorry.
It is a loaded question.
But I think there's an element, there's an aspect to it as far as, the pharmaceutical industry is a very profitable industry. And I think when it comes to medical marijuana, that can be a less expensive alternative in some cases. And I don't know if the profit margins are as much, So I know that I think that brings a lot of reluctancy with the whole approval of it in certain circumstances, So
sadly, the political, financial, and medical have to all be lumped together. You know what I mean? And that's very unfortunate for doctors like myself who really want to think about it in a way that is used in an appropriate, safe, aware way.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have another 5 to 7 minutes with you. Here's another question that I think the listeners would like to hear your answer.
I would love if Bryan had some thoughts on it. I'd love his. he seems to look like he would like to add a lot to the conversation.
Oh, sure, yeah, because Bryan, you can jump in anytime. We're gonna kind of get into your story and get into your side of this in the second segment, but feel free to jump in, and you can address to this question too. I guess my next question would be, is when a person, is prescribed and they try the medical marijuana for various conditions that they may have, mental health issues they may have, what is the actual effect? What is the medical marijuana doing to their brain, their nervous system, their heart? What has the research found that what's the beneficial event that takes place when it's brought into the body?
Man, you do like to ask me very complicated questions, right?
Well, you're a doctor.
Because there are a lot of body systems that are impacted by whether it's cannabis, whether it's pharmaceutical, whether it's food or anything that you take into your body is going to impact anything you take into your body is going to impact your brain as well, which people need to understand. And so what has the research shown? That but again, this is with the caveat that I definitely would love more well-designed, larger studies that have that are going to come out with real guidelines for me to understand what happens when somebody smokes or vapes or it uses edibles or tinctures. That all those things are different. But so it's first, if you're smoking or vaping, right, to think of first is the lungs. It's hitting the lungs, right? You're inhaling, and so that's something to think about. If people have lung issues or chronic lung issues, things like that, you might not want to do that because that can impact, and make things potentially worse. But then once it's, in your body, and impact, it then, is crosses the blood-brain barrier, and that it may it has impact on a number of different structures in the brain, right? So that's sort of what we would want to think about, and whether it's complicated because we're talking about, are we talking about mature brains, or are we talking about brains that are still developing? Your brain is still developing until you're in your mid-20s, right? So that's where I say that that's one of my very strong points, that it's very hard for me to certainly recommend recreational cannabis for anybody under the age while their brains are still developing, right? So, and also that's the other thing about even medical cannabis. There, like I have certified people for it for very specific conditions, right? For people above 21. That's the age that you need to be to be certified for to go into a medical dispensary, right? But so it might impact things like the frontal lobe, right? That's the decision making, the impulse control area, the attention and focus area. But it gets even more complicated when people say, well, it helps me focus, or it helps my ADD, right? Whereas some of the research that's come out says that it might impact it, in a less than positive way. So that's why I say, well, cannabis is not one size fits all. It's very individual, and we may have to look at it that way. And there's also a very, very big difference for those who are using it in a moderation versus chronic users. And you have to do a little bit more deeper looking into, I say it may be a paradigm shift in that, we cannot sort of say, it's like it's going to impact everybody in one way. That's maybe not the case. Like, each person's brain is different, and so how it impacts the individual can be very different. That, like, how it would impact me would be very different than how it might impact Bryan or you, right? And
right.
Whether it's age or medical conditions that you're struggling with, or why you're using it, and things like that. These are all things that I have to think about as a physician.
Mm-hmm. Now,
do no harm.
We're coming up on a break here, and then we're going to bring Bryan in, and then both you can chime in the second segment. But just one last thing I wanted to ask you, Dr. Siegel, when it comes to medical marijuana, are your clients that you're working with, do they have to be on that for a undetermined amount of time? Like, I work with several people that they have a set of pharmaceutical meds that they've been told that they have to be on it for the rest of their lives. Do we have enough research, enough case studies to determine if this is something that someone has to be on or taking for an undetermined amount of time, or is it a short-term situation?
It's a very interesting question also. I loved what Montel Williams, I was on the Montel Williams Let's Be Blunt podcast not long ago, and he's definitely used cannabis for his MS, his very severe debilitating illness, chronic illness, right? And what he said best was that, how he used cannabis 10 years ago or longer ago versus how he uses it now has evolved. And, depending on sort of yes, that's how I kind of think of whether it's pharmaceutical or whether it's cannabis, that it may not be a lifetime thing, but it may be, used for a specific purpose or a specific amount of time. And, that may be what's needed. Again, like you said, I definitely think more research is needed for that to have, that come out and say, yes, I definitely think people may need to be on it for the rest of their lives. I'm not sure, but I think that, what we know right now is that, people evolve and grow, and like their use of medications or plant-based medicines, all kinds of things evolve over time. I think for each case it's different, right? And definitely dealing with a chronic illness is way more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But I would always say that like the need is to do more research for sure, so we can say this safely.
Well, we're going to come up on a quick break, and I want to remind the listeners that you are the author of the book, The Brain on Cannabis, What You Should Know About Recreational and Medical Marijuana. So we'll have all your links, in the show notes, but we'll definitely have a link so that the listeners can get a copy of your book. Because I think there's going to be a lot of listeners that want to know more or would like this as a possible option. And that's another question that we'll get into as far as if it's not allowed in the state they live in, what options do they have? That's another loaded question, I guess. But just stick with me. Bryan, we're going to bring you in after the break, and we'll be back after a short break. We are talking with Dr. Rebecca Siegel on medical marijuana and recreational use of cannabis for a variety of different anxiety and mood disorders. PTSD also is what we're talking about today. So, and we'll be talking with Bryan Buckley when we get back. So stay with me, and we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome our new sponsor, Scars and Stripes Coffee Company. They empower veterans to build their own business using their e-commerce platform. When you purchase from Scars and Stripes Coffee, you are buying from a veteran, and your purchase directly impacts the men and women who have served our country. Do more than say, thank you for your service. Order today and empower a veteran. Use vet code BRADRICHARD at scarsandstripescoffee.com. That's scarsandstripescoffee.com. Have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. They have great creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, and it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many, many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you'll need to make a podcast in one place. Check them out and download the free Anchor app, or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm to get started. Welcome back, everyone. That was a short sponsor break. We are back. This is episode 69, and we are having a conversation about PTSD during this month of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. The first segment, we were talking with Dr. Siegel, her background, her book that she has recently written, The Brain on Cannabis. And we also have another individual on with us, Bryan Buckley. Bryan, welcome. I wanted to bring you into the second segment. Dr. Siegel will chime in here, and we'll just kind of, we'll go at this, a team approach. So welcome, Bryan.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's nice to have you here. I did read your bio in the beginning, and so I don't want to go back over that as much, but can you tell the listeners your experience? Have you been prescribed medical cannabis, and are you a patient?
I am a patient of cannabis. In reality, my entire life growing up, I was in athletics, so never really looked at anything like towards cannabis or anything of that nature. Then obviously in the military, it is a big no-go to use cannabis being a Schedule I narcotic. So when I returned from combat and I left the Marine Corps, I was designated as 100% disabled by the VA, having post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, and I was also wounded in Afghanistan. So, I got some metal still stuck in my body, all that good stuff. And for me, really, my body was kind of at war with itself. I just was not able to sleep. it was kind of hard for me. I always tell people, first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning is war, and the last thing I think about before I go to bed is war. It's just something that's part of me. And it was finally when I got introduced to cannabis, my body finally went to peace, and I got a good night of sleep. And that's when I really thought, like, hey, this is something special. And there's some great veteran advocacy groups out there, and they're doing a lot of great lobbying efforts. But I wanted to see what we could do to help out the people on Capitol Hill to federally legalize medical cannabis. So I had the opportunity to talk with some members of Congress, and I said, what would you guys need to get this into the VA medical system? And they said, you better go get data and go get American doctors, and you're going to have a good case. So we formed a partnership with a firm out of Israel called Niametic Healthcare and Research Services, as well as the University of California at Irvine. And we got approved for what they call an institutional review board, meaning we've been cleared to conduct human trials with whatever we're studying. So our first research will be to see if medical cannabis can reduce the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And the gentleman who's leading our steering committee is a man named Dr. Victor Novak. At one point, he was in charge of Harvard's Clinical Research Institute. He studied underneath Dr. Mashulam, and just a great guy. He knows how to kind of work with the FDA. So we're kind of following his lead. And, nice thing is we're a little bit bullish about how positive we think the results will be, is because Niametic has already published in PubMed, and they showed that cannabis can reduce post-traumatic stress symptoms.
When it comes to the VA, okay, I'm an Army vet of 7 years. I'm familiar with the VA. Does the VA doctors, are they currently prescribing that to their patients?
No, they cannot, since it is a Schedule I narcotic, which means it has no medical benefit and it's highly addictive. To put that in perspective, cocaine is a Schedule II. So in theory, we look at cannabis as more dangerous than cocaine. So,
Wow.
But things are starting to change. I mean, you kind of look at what happened during COVID. I'm in California, and cannabis got deemed essential because of the medical benefits. So you're kind of like, hey, you guys can't take that one back. You're kind of admitting there's something here that it can help out on the medicinal side. But, you talk to VA doctors, off the record kind of thing, and they get it. I mean, I think they're doing the best they can with what they have, but they are very much interested to see what medical cannabis can do versus prescribing. Maybe some vets are taking up to 15 pills a day. And one of the people who was working on the UC Irvine staff, she was a former VA doctor. And when we started talking about how bad opiates were, and we have an opiate epidemic, they cut off her patients right away. I mean, there was no winding down period. They just showed up at the pharmacy hoping to get their opiates, and they said no more. And 2 of them ended up committing suicide. And she's very much she's very happy to be a part of this study, because she's like, I think there's really something here and a lot of untapped potential. We just got to prove it with data, and the data won't lie.
Yeah, you brought up the 2 veterans that committed suicide. With the staggering number that we know of each day, 22 one day, 20 another, 24 another, but around 22 a day is the number that you hear of veterans committing suicide. And the mental health issue in the veteran community is so huge that this as an alternative, or this as a course of treatment, needs to be expedited. Really, what do they have to lose when it comes to treating more vets with this? I think the pharmaceutical aspect of it, when it comes to veterans, I might, like you, I know a lot of veterans that are on many different medications, many a day, and that's keeping them functioning, but it's not really keeping them out of that dark place that so many of them are going to right now. And so, I mean, good luck to you and the work that you're doing with this study and with this group of people. Now, what's the name of the group of people that you are working with?
The Israeli group is called Niamedic Healthcare and Research Services, and then the American side, who will be our principal investigators, will be UC Irvine Health. And so basically, I'm hitting every check in the checkbox I can that Congress said. They're like, go get data. The Israelis will take care of that. Go get American doctors. They will validate everything that we're doing. So essentially, it'll be the Israeli doctors working with U.S. veterans, while the American doctors watch and write down and say yay or nay to what's actually happening. And, to kind of go back to your thing on mental health and the veteran suicide rate, there's a really alarming study that Boston University put out in June of 2021. Now I'm going to add 13 more to the killed in action count due to the whole debacle we had in Afghanistan last August. But during the global war on terrorism, let's just say September of 2001, we have lost 7,070 troops on the battlefield. During that same period, we've lost nearly 31,000 active duty and veterans to suicide. So if you think about it, it's more dangerous for us to be in America than it is patrolling the streets of Fallujah, Iraq, or operating in the Helmand River Valley of Afghanistan. And that's really, truly alarming. And that's where you got to kind of look at this mental health issue that we're going through is, I, again, talk about how much I think about war. That is my demon. You're never going to get rid of it. You just got to learn to live above it. And these men and women, unfortunately, couldn't overcome this demon and, thought their only alternative was to take their own life. So with us just having Memorial Day yesterday, obviously that's a day that we think about the men and women who went forward and died on the battlefield for us. But I also think we need to kind of wrap in the veterans who've returned from combat and lost their lives here due to what they went through in combat with the post-traumatic stress.
I agree 100% on that. Those numbers are staggering. They make me very angry, and very troubled by that. They're very believable. And I'm gonna, Dr. Siegel, question for you. A veteran now, for them to be able to get medical marijuana as a course of treatment, they have to go outside of the VA. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So they have to have their own independent insurance. The VA is not paying for anything. I mean,
as
they're
far
on
as
their
I'm
own.
aware, no,
Yeah,
they do not.
Yeah, exactly. Insurance, regardless, won't cover cannabis. I mean, that's coming straight out of your pocket. That if you want to go get that medicine.
Okay. Yeah, it's just nuts. I mean, it's crazy. And those numbers and the point that you made, that more veterans are dying on American soil than they did overseas. That should be just a huge wake-up call to so many, and it's not, which is unfortunate, to say the least. Tell us, Bryan, your personal experience with it. How long have you been? How long have you been using, medical cannabis?
Yeah, I started using medical cannabis in 2016. I pretty much use it just for medicinal reasons. I'm not a guy who gets up and utilizes cannabis. It's usually for nighttime. I kind of have a little routine. I might kind of have a couple hits on my vape pen prior to dinner to kind of warm up my endocannabinoid system. And then before I go to bed, I might have a couple more hits off my vape pen. And that usually does a trick to, put me down and keep me down. And if I have to get up in the middle of the night to use a restroom, it's not a problem for me to go back to sleep versus, before where I might be watching SportsCenter for like 2 hours just trying to finally fall back to sleep. So it's been really beneficial. And that's kind of some of the things that we're working with when I'm dealing with Congress. And I'm working with both the Senate and the House and both Democrats and Republicans. I'm just attacking this problem like a Marine. I'm very apolitical. It's just we want to accomplish a mission. And what I'm finding with Republicans is they're very much kind of still Reagan Republicans, like we were just talking about the drug war, and they just think drugs are bad. I think we need to get to a point saying drugs aren't necessarily bad, but drug abuse is bad. And the way this study that we are going to have is it's all going to be microdosing. It will either be available in a pill or tincture form, just due to that's the only things that have been through clinical trials. And we're going to have a couple of variants here, like a daytime variant. It might be a 1 THC to 300 CBD. But what the Israelis have told me is they have not seen as of yet that CBD by itself has the effect that a little bit of THC has. The THC is essentially your engine that can drive the medicine into your endocannabinoid system and allow it to do its work. Our nighttime variant will be cranked up a little bit higher in THC because they're finding that veterans kind of need that kind of euphoric feeling to help them get some sleep and kind of just, turn down the music a little bit. So I think it's going to be a very digestible way for people in Congress to kind of understand how we're going about this. We're not going to be like, oh, everyone's going to rip bong hits and just kind of sit on their couch all day. No, that's not it. But we have to be realistic about how this medicine can work. And I think it's going to, again, generate some very positive results once we complete the study.
Go ahead.
It's important to understand that not everybody wants to get high. They want to get relief. And so when you think of using it as a therapeutic option, it may not be right for some, or all. It may be right, it might be right for some, not all. But I think that what Bryan is saying is that people are thoughtfully looking into how to go about this and, providing real, controlled trials so that doctors can get behind it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The thought that I had just a second ago, I got it back. I look at. Well, let me ask you this, Bryan. In your opinion, how many veterans are, since they don't have access to it, or possibly they can't afford, to have access to the medical marijuana? How many veterans do you think are using just the street marijuana?
Well, I think that's complicated. If you look at states where cannabis is legal, both medical and recreational, I always tell people there's a safety concern here. Mm-hmm. And if you're buying stuff off the streets, it's not going through a third-party state test, and you have no idea what you're putting into your body. The stuff that you can buy on the adult use market or the medical market, I'll use California, for example, you have to send that to a third-party state tester to ensure that it can be consumed by humans. And, we went through a little bit of a vape crisis, if you will, about 2 years ago, where people were buying some cannabis that was the oil that was cut with some really bad things, and people's lungs were blowing up or lungs were filling up with metal, and it was terrible. And it didn't come from a legal market. Everything in California that people were impacted came from an illicit shop. So I always encourage people to go to actual legal shops because you're going to know what you're putting in your body. People that are in states or veterans that are in states that do not have a cannabis program, yeah, they're kind of on their own. And, hopefully, some are doing home grows, which is great agritherapy for veterans. Sometimes veterans don't want to deal with people and they like to take care of a plant all day, and it's just very therapeutic for them. But that's a real big concern. And that's why you're kind of looking at our government of what bills would make the most sense. I mean, I'm going to go on a little tangent here, but you got the MORE Act that just passed the House for a second time. That bill is no good. I mean, it literally does not deschedule it. It only decriminalizes it. So essentially the government's saying what you're doing is illegal. We're just not going to arrest you. And it goes into a 5% federal tax that turns into an 8% tax after year 3. And that has no relief on anything when we're dealing with things like tax code 280E, and people are in the cannabis business. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about there. Then you get Chuck Schumer's bill where I don't even know if it has a name. I'm just going to call it like the Taximus Maximus. I mean, they want a 25% federal tax. And again, doesn't decriminalize it, doesn't remove it from a schedule, which makes it very hard to do research. And that, again, if you look at California, consumers are paying 40 to 60% tax on their cannabis. You add another 25%. You're just blowing up the illicit market at that point. But one bill that I think people need to pay attention to, and she's actually a Republican and she's a freshman congresswoman out of South Carolina, is Representative Nancy Mace, and her bill is called the State Reform Act. And basically it would legalize cannabis, it would remove it from the schedule, it would allow VA doctors to prescribe cannabis, and it comes into a 3% federal tax, which is very doable once you get rid of tax code 280E. But it also allows the states to decide how they want to implement their cannabis programs. So, people need to kind of pay attention to a couple of these things because it's going to be really important, and it's only a matter of time. I just hope we don't mess it up where we make it so bad like we did in California and we blow up the illicit market. I mean, to give you an example, I think in 2021, it's estimated that the legal market did about $4 billion in sales, where the illicit market did about $8 billion in sales. And again, wow. What's dangerous about the illegal side, you have no idea what you're putting into your body. And I just tell people, stay away from the street weed because you have no idea what you're going to do. And it could be more harmful than good.
Right. Yeah. Fentanyl was in the back of my head. I mean, I know that's an issue where a lot of it does have fentanyl, embedded into it. There's been a lot of young people that have died from it. And I guess the longer it's drug out, and the more roadblocks, people are feeling that they don't have a choice. That it's like, well, I have to try it, or it does work for me, but my doctor won't prescribe it. But I'm going to get it somewhere. I'm going to get it one way or another. If it brings them a little peace of mind, and allows them to sleep, or helps them with night terrors, or whatever the case may be. So, it's.
No, that's a great point what you're bringing up, and to kind of jump on Dr. Siegel's point is, I'll never sit here and say medical cannabis is for every veteran. However, it should be a tool in the toolkit, and if it makes sense for that individual, then let's prescribe it to them. But if it doesn't, like if there's, the Israelis, again, I'm just gonna go off what they're saying is, for our research, if people have a history of psychosis in their family, they believe that cannabis can exacerbate psychosis and can, bring it out, which is not a good thing. Also, people with highly addictive tendencies might be a kind of a flag to look at. But again, being a Schedule I narcotic, it is extremely difficult to conduct research on it. And we were very blessed to be given not just an institutional review board, but a private institutional review board, meaning we can use our own product to study and manipulate as needed, versus working with the University of Mississippi and the National Institute of Drug Abuse program that they have, where I honestly think their cannabis would not even pass a third-party state test here in California due to the mold and just the terrible quality of cannabis it is. And again, I sometimes say it's just in the name of the organization, National Institute of Drug Abuse. I don't know if they're necessarily looking for the potential that it could provide on a medicinal level.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Siegel, if someone is currently residing in a state where it is not legal, it is not in a dispensary, you can't get it unless you buy it off the street. Right now,
well, there are definitely states, that it's adult use, where like if people can travel and they're 21 or over, they can absolutely get it legally, right? So,
right, and yeah, that was kind of my question. They can travel to a state where it is illegal, but they're not allowed if they're in a state that doesn't allow it in any form. Okay.
Oh, right. Then they cannot transport it back. It's very complicated.
So they can use it in the state they travel to, but they can't bring it across state lines. They can't bring it back in.
Right. It's a huge problem. It's absolutely a very, very big problem.
Okay. And
just allowing the illegal market to flourish.
Right.
And commerce. And
God only knows what is, in the street supply. Nobody really knows, where it's coming. Well, we know where a lot of it's coming from, but you don't know what's in it. So the testing is paramount. That's most important, that it does go through testing and that it's clean, and it's just the medical marijuana and nothing else. So,
and jump on that just for a safety issue. I always tell people it's it's really difficult here in the state of California to decipher what is a legal versus an illegal market. And if you go into a dispensary, they should have their license displayed with a QR code that you can just take a quick picture of and look, and it will validate that it is a legal dispensary. We one time just went into what we call trap shops, which are just the legal dispensaries. We bought 3 very well-known cannabis brands, oil products, their vape lines, and we sent it to a third-party state tester. And we just told them, like, listen, this is not our stuff. We bought it here. We just want to take a quick look at it and see what's inside of it. They called us back after testing, and they're like, please tell us you have that nowhere near your guys' stuff. I'm like, no. They're like, there is stuff in here that might potentially kill people. And then if you look at the certificate of analysis, which is your whole entire testing form of what the cannabis has inside of it, all 3 of the COAs were exactly the same, but again, they were just 3 different brands. So one dealer, if you will, just replicated 3 boxes of well-known brands and put the same oil in them and sold them to a trap shop, which would have huge negative effects on people if they went in there and consumed it. So I always stress to people, if you're first time in a shop, make sure you find that license with the QR code and just take a picture and validate that you're actually in a legal cannabis dispensary.
That's a great point. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Do you think, I know you touched base on the CBD oil. Do you feel that that is better than nothing for some veterans that, number one, they can't travel? Or, if they do, and it's like, well, now I can't bring it home. Now I can't bring it back to where I live. Do you think that the CBD oil has enough of a benefit that they should be trying that if they can in their state?
I guess people can try what works for them. Again, I think there is a real thing with a placebo effect. I am just a guy who once served in the military, so I just kind of tend to lean on the doctors, and especially the Israelis who've had decades of research on cannabis. And again, they said they have not seen to this date CBD as a standalone have the effect that it needs compared to just, again, a 1 to 300 ratio with THC to CBD with cannabis. I mean, you look at things like Charlotte's Web that has helped out children with epilepsy. I mean, that is, again, like a 1 to 300 ratio. And the way they explained to me, they're like, you could have a really cool looking car, but if you don't have a nice engine, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's essentially what THC is to get into your endocannabinoid system and to allow the medicine to do the work it needs to do.
Okay. So it's an option, but it's not really, a productive one. It's not going to get them there. Yeah.
It could. Again, I don't want to dissuade anyone. It's your journey. Again, I just go off of what the medical team that I'm working with says. But you never know. They might have some big breakthrough with CBD, and that's a great thing, which would be amazing because, once the Farm Bill went through, essentially CBD became federally legal. So there's a lot more easier ways to move around it versus if you by chance bought cannabis in, California and drove to Texas and someone pulled you over, you became a felon, so it's a tough one.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I think that the study of cannabis, like whether it's CBD or THC, that like there's so much benefit potentially that, the definitely much more intense studies needed for just the like various, phytocannabinoids. And that can be, how we can look forward to, more types of more natural medications that actually might be based on the phytocannabinoids in cannabis, and that will be directed towards the endocannabinoid system in our bodies.
Right. Dr. Siegel, can you just, for the listeners, can you give them a perspective on the difference between the laws in California, where Bryan's at, and the laws in New York, where you're at? What, I don't think they're similar, are they?
Well, the major thing is, yes, New York State is adult use legal at this point, but the actual dispensaries haven't been set up or implemented yet. So medical cannabis is similar in California and New York State, but I think that New York is evolving so quickly, and New York I think that obviously it's a whole different thing. California has it's been out as medical and adult use for many years already. New York has a definite looking at different states, how they legalized things and what things were better, what things were worse, and worked for different states. I think that's really important, for sure. But I mean, it's. I think, are you talking about the different products that are available, or there's all kinds of various differences that could possibly be between California and New York?
Yeah, as far now, if I understand you correctly, now there are not dispensaries in the state of New York.
There are medical dispensaries. There are not adult use or recreational dispensaries yet. They're getting set up.
Okay.
It's just around the corner.
Yeah, which I think is a great thing, because I want everyone to learn from the mistakes of California. I mean, they had good intentions. This kind of got wrapped up into some confusion of what is illegal and what isn't an illegal dispensary. In 1996, California was a state to allow medical use under what they called Prop 215. And it was essentially, you were like a non-profit collective. And so you had to have a certain amount of patients to rate how much cannabis you could grow and so on and so forth, and had to have a medical card. Well, the problem with that is you had, once Prop 64 was voted on in 2016 and adult use was allowed, you have this ambiguity of where's an legal shop and where's an illegal shop. And for example, I talked to a city council member up in Los Angeles, and I said, how many illegal dispensaries do you think are in the city of Los Angeles? And he goes, we don't know, but there's more of them than there are Starbucks, to put things into perspective.
Wow.
And when you look at, states like New York or Michigan, and, you got New Jersey, they're all coming online. I mean, their illegal shops was probably Tom down the street in his garage, right? There wasn't a big dispensary set up. So doing it this way, kind of having everything approved and adult use kind of moving a little bit more fast, I think it's going to be great, because really the only established shops will be the legal shops. And they're not going to kind of run into that gray area that California is still combating. And we finally just kind of toughened up on some of the things that can happen to you if you're caught owning an illegal dispensary, which was good, because it really was kind of a slap on the wrist. And they could care less, because they're not paying taxes, any of that stuff. So they would just kind of ride it out, pay their fine, and then move down the street and open up another illegal shop and wait for someone to come get them. So, hopefully we get a little more tougher on the illegal market, and that will clean things up, because again, it's all about safety.
Wow. Okay. Bryan, as far as the listeners go, how can they help you? And how can they get more information about what you're doing? You're very actively involved in the industry. And so I'm going to have your links in the show notes, and they can just reach out. You have a website, correct?
Yeah, if they want to, you can learn more about Helmand Valley Growers Company if you go to hvgcompany.com. And if they would like to help us out with their research, regardless of where they are in the country, I should kind of take a step back here. 100% of profits from Helmand Valley Growers Company products goes back to fund our research. But if people aren't in the state of California, they want to get behind us and help us out, you can go to our nonprofit, battlebrothersfoundation.org, and make a donation. And that would greatly help us out, because this is a very expensive research we're trying to conduct, and we're not getting much help from the federal government or anything. We're kind of doing this on our own. And I encourage all the listeners to go get Dr. Siegel's book. I read it. It's great. It captures you right in the beginning, and it just anyone can relate to.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you, Bryan, for being on the podcast with us. Dr. Siegel, I want to thank you as well. And once again, your book is called The Brain on Cannabis, What You Should Know About Recreational and Medical Marijuana. So we will have links for Bryan and for you, Dr. Siegel, in the show notes. I encourage the listeners to get a copy of your book, and they will be able to reach out to either one of you or both of you. And I hope they got some benefit from the episode. I did. And it really drives home the need for research and for progress, especially in the veteran community, which of course that's my whole thing. That's where I land is in that group of men and women that served served our country. So thank you, Dr. Siegel. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Thank you for having me, for sure. And absolutely, we want to do this in a well-researched, safe, aware way. Absolutely, so physicians can get behind it. We want to think of cannabis as a therapeutic option, for sure.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to have you on. You're very welcome. Bryan, thank you. I'm gonna end the episode like I always do. It was great content. Thank you both for awesome information. But I'll end episode 69 the way I always do. Remember to love yourself, take care of yourself, love your little me, because they need you more than you can imagine. So until next time on the Men on a Mission podcast, bye for now.
First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might, and the army goes rolling along. Proud of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won, and the army goes rolling along. And it's high, high, hey, the army's on its way. Count off the cages loud and strong. For wherever we go, you will always know that the army goes rolling along. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight